I'm Dean Beadle, autistic speaker, former journalist and singer.
Hello Dean. So the first question we have for you today is, what jobs have you had before becoming an international keynote speaker?
The only job I've ever done is speaking publicly. I was 15 years old and the lady that did my file at Learning Support at school was on a course at the local university, and she said, they need someone to share their experiences at the end of the course, would you do it? And I said, no, that's not the sort of thing I'd do at all, it's much too terrifying. And she said, they'll pay you. And I said, when do they want me? And so I rocked up and I did it, and I read off this bit of paper and I was shaking and I was terrified. And at the end of it, my mum stood up at the back, and there's only about 20 people in this tiny room, and she stood up at the back and she said, that talk has helped me to understand my little 5-year-old better than anything else I've read or been to or heard. And suddenly I realised there was something I could do that was unique to me, because only I could share my experiences, and that I could use some experiences that maybe had been challenging for me through education to try and help change the way that other autistic children were taught and treated at school. And that was really positive. And so it sort of started from there and it grew. And now 15 years on, it's what I do all the time.
Lovely. And what didn't work well for you and why in terms of employment?
I think there's certainly an uncertainty about self-employment that's been difficult for me, because you never know entirely. There's Joan Rivers, the comedian, always used to call it the white pages of death. When you open up your diary and you see white pages and you think, how am I going to pay the bills? And I can't say there's ever not been a December where I've looked ahead at the following year's work and worried. And then come February, everything's falling into place and the work's coming in, and it's always been okay, touch wood. But there's always that uncertainty, and I don't like that so much. But I'd still say it was outweighed by the positives of being self-employed, definitely.
And what is it that you like but you're not doing now, and why?
It's difficult to say what I like that I'm not doing currently, because I've sort of shaped my career to make sure that I only do the things I like now. There was a long period where I did work, because it was early stages and I had to make a living and I had to establish myself in my field. I had to accept all the work that came in, and it meant doing things that made me incredibly anxious. I used to do a lot of school assemblies, for example, and I find them terrifying. Because a school audience is a completely different audience to a group of adults. It just is. And I'd always get a lot out of doing those sessions, but I'd worry about them for weeks in advance. And so a few years ago I decided what I wanted to do was shape my career so that I only did stuff that gave me energy rather than took it. There are still moments that are challenging and taxing, but I've tried to shape it so that I only do the things that I want to do. Of course that's affected by bills that you've got to pay, and that affects your choices sometimes. But on the whole, I've tried to phase out some of the stuff that just didn't have any benefit for me. If it came with too big an emotional cost, then I tried to phase it out.
And how did you make the leap from having given a talk to being an autistic speaker?
It was gradual. I started my career in 2004 and I did one talk that year. And then in 2005 I did 2 talks, and it was from the same people that had booked me in the previous year. So word had got around locally, just in my little London borough. And that was quite grand as a teenager, so I'd done 3 talks. So I decided I needed to email the National Autistic Society and tell them they needed me on their conference. And it was in the days when they did their international conference, and it used to be in Hammersmith at the Novotel. And I emailed them and said, you need to have me at once. And I heard nothing. And then they emailed me back about a week before the conference and said, are you still available? So I assume someone must have fallen out or dropped away or been unwell. And I said, I'll do it. And so the following week I turned up. As it turned out, Temple Grandin was in the front row of that workshop. I didn't know who she was at the time. It's lucky I didn't. And it was the first talk I'd ever done where I didn't read off a piece of paper. I just had bullet pointed notes, and it was terrifying. And it went down so well that off the back of it, people came up to me from the audience and said, will you come to Sheffield? Will you come to Manchester? And it just grew from there. But it probably took 4 years, I'd say, from when I first started to being able to call it my living and to be able to pay my bills and put food on the table and be comfortable, I had to really work. There were a few years where there wasn't much work at all, but it grew and grew, and it was gradual. It was sort of pre-Twitter, it was before Facebook got very big, so a lot of it was word of mouth, so it took more time then than it probably does now to get established in the field. And so I had to go out there and do tiny jobs in town halls and speak to 20 people above a church in St Albans, and not that St Albans is the middle of nowhere, but tiny little audiences all over the place. I had to put the hours in to build up the reputation, I suppose, and to prove to charities and organisations they should get me in. It probably took about 4 years.
And what are the advantages of being self-employed?
The advantages of being self-employed would be the freedom. Fundamentally, I've got the choice to say no, and that's really important to me. It's important to me that I can sit down in January and say, okay, I'd like the second week in February off. It means accepting other work in other months to make up for it, but I can make those choices. It means that I can structure in recovery time into my week. So if I've got 3 jobs in a week and a 4th one comes in, I'm more than likely to say no to it because I need that day to recover. I can make those choices. If I was in full-time employment, I'm restricted to when I can have that recovery time in the evenings and at the weekends or whatever. And I know many autistics that work a full week and manage that and make that work. I guess the fortunate thing for me is that I can make time in my week where I don't have to be around people, where I don't have to be interacting, to balance out the time that I am around lots of people, because the job I do is very people-y. There's lots of people around all the time. So that's a benefit. I can maintain my integrity because I'm not owned by anybody. So I can choose who I want to work with, and I can certainly choose who I don't want to work with. And because I've been in the field long enough now, I'm in a position where I can say no. I mean, that doesn't mean that I'm rolling in money, certainly not, I'm getting by. But I can make those choices. As long as I've got enough in the diary to pay my bills and my overheads, then I can then make choices based on what I want to do and what I don't. And that's the luxury. So although self-employment is uncertain, it can also be very exciting because you never know what the offer's going to be that comes in. The next day could be the day that the really exciting offer comes through that you've always wanted to do. The conference that you've always fancied, a country that you've always wanted to go to. So that excitement outweighs it. Also the freedom outweighs it, and the freedom of choice, and that's really important to me.
And what are the disadvantages and what things that you find difficult about being self-employed?
The difficult thing about being self-employed is that you're expected to find all the answers out yourself. So I was never sent a booklet from the tax office on what to do, what I was expected to do. So when I started self-employment, I didn't think you needed to register as self-employed until you weren't over the threshold to pay tax. So I worked for 3 months because I was doing tiny jobs here and there. I was not making enough over the threshold, which in those days was, I think, £3,500. I'd not earned over that, and I thought, well, I'm not due to pay any tax, so I'll just fill in a form when I go over the threshold, because that's what I thought you did. Until I worked at a school in Berkshire, and they said, no, you need to be registered, otherwise we can't pay you. And so I registered and backdated it and told them when I'd started working, and it was all sorted. But I didn't know you needed to do that. No one told you. I didn't know that you had to pay some of your tax in advance if you earned over a certain amount. And that stung me 4 years after that, because a bill arrived on the map double what I expected. No one warned you about that. So there's lots about self-employment. They just expect you to look up, but you don't know what you don't know. So that's the difficult part, is that you're sort of working it out as you go along. I suppose if you've got an accountant or a tax advisor, maybe that takes some of that out of it, because they'd be able to guide you. I also think dealing with a tax office is a skill in itself. I'm quite good at convincing them to do what I want them to do generally. So I found that stressful. I find filling in the tax return stressful. I can do it, but I have to sort of G myself up to do it. Again, the uncertainty is a big aspect of what I don't like about it. The cash flow can sometimes be difficult, because when you're in full-time employment, you're lucky enough to have a payday and a set amount of money that comes every month. In self-employment, you know what you've earned that month, but you don't know when it's arriving. And so sometimes it's a couple of weeks, sometimes it can be months with some employers who are more unscrupulous. That uncertainty can be difficult when you're trying to forecast what you're going to spend your money on, when you can pay your bills. So there's a lot of juggling involved financially.
And is there any advice that you'd give anyone else wanting to follow in your footsteps?
Advice I'd give people following in my footsteps is have belief that what you are sharing has huge value. There will be people out there that will try and make you work for free. Certainly if you're going to be speaking about being autistic publicly, there will be people that will try early days to get you to work for nothing. You have to remember that that audience is there to hear what you're saying, and therefore what you're saying is the entire value of the event. What you have to share is unique to you, it has huge value, others will get an awful lot from it. It is worth whatever you charge for it. Don't be frightened to charge. I get an awful lot of autistic people messaging me privately saying I'm nervous to ask for money, I don't know how much to ask for. I would say contact someone who's doing a similar job to the one you want to do. Find out roughly how they go about it, how they go about charging, what their rules are. Do they have a structure? You know, very often people will be happy, if not to share the exact figures of what they earn, they'll be happy to sort of guide you in how to best look after yourself. But more than anything, to put a value on what you do. And have passion that what you're delivering has huge value. Never let anybody devalue that.
Is there anything else you wanted to add for people looking at self-employment?
Looking at employment generally, one thing I'd like to add is I am a patron of a charity in North London, and they support LD adults, but also autistic adults. And last year the big focus of our yearly conference was employment. And so I put a question out on social media on all the platforms saying, autistic people, what would you like to say about employment? And I was overwhelmed with the feedback of what people had said. And the overwhelming message that came through was that people wanted to have their needs supported and understood. But what they didn't want was to feel like a token. What they didn't want was to feel talked down to or to feel like the office problem. Because they weren't. They had tons to offer. They had tons of skills and abilities. One person said, when your eyes roll, I can see them. And that was a real shocker bit of feedback, really, because it made me realise that person was well aware that people were finding it a stressful requirement to meet her needs. And I found that really distressing. Because in my view, basic human resources is to meet every employee's needs, autistic or otherwise. Another message that came through was that they felt that generally job interviews weren't well suited to autistic people. One person said the best actor gets the job rather than the person who's better at doing the job. And that's probably accurate because the interview is a test of banter. It's not necessarily a test of doing the job. And of course some autistic people are fabulous at banter. But some of those that fed back said they found that aspect of the interview really difficult because they felt that it was set up for someone else to succeed and not necessarily for them. I met one autistic lad, who'd be a man now, who was going for a job interview in tech, and he knew he could do the job inside out. He knew he had the knowledge, but he knew that maybe he'd find the interview overwhelming, he'd find it anxiety making because it was an unusual environment, a stressful situation, high expectation. So he sat down the night before with an exercise book and he wrote everything he knew about the topic in the exercise book, handed it across the table and got the job because he proved he could do it. So we need to look at the interview process and the job application process because very often the people who are best placed to do the job fall at the hurdle of an interview that's set up to fit only a tiny percentage of the people applying, the people that can act through the interview and lie best, essentially. And a lot of people were talking about sensory requirements and saying that the difference that being allowed to wear earphones can make in a work situation, turning the lights down, sitting further away from noisy photocopiers or ringing phones, or for some people that was the difference between coping in the office and not being able to.